The sharp, low cry of an animal pierced the stillness of the savannah, its agonizing tone filling the air and reaching the man's ears long before he could see the source. It wasn't the usual roar or growl of a lion, but something far more raw, the unmistakable sound of pain. It stopped him in his tracks. His heart skipped a beat as he stood frozen for a moment, his senses now heightened, every instinct on alert. The cry echoed again, this time louder and more desperate, followed by a brief silence before another scream tore through the air. The man felt his chest tighten, his thoughts racing. There was no time to waste. He pushed forward, his body moving on its own, each step pulling him toward the sound. His mind couldn't yet make sense of what was happening, but he knew something was terribly wrong. As he moved through the dry, cracked earth, the wind carrying the scent of dust and parched grass, he finally spotted her, a lioness, collapsed beneath the shade of a small acacia tree. Her massive body was curled unnaturally, her legs stretched out stiffly in a way that seemed to betray the force of the agony she was enduring. The golden fur that should have shimmered in the sun was matted with dirt and darker stains, blood. The sight of it sent a chill through the man's spine. He couldn't be sure what had happened to her, but the injury was serious, far beyond anything he had expected. Her breath was shallow, labored, each intake of air accompanied by a deep, throaty pain that seemed to echo in the stillness. The man's steps quickened as he moved closer, his feet barely making a sound against the dry earth. There was no dramatic thrashing or frantic movement, just the quiet presence of an animal on the verge of collapse. He knelt beside her, his heart heavy, but he didn't rush. His eyes scanned her body for any visible injuries, gashes or wounds that could explain the blood, yet there were no obvious signs of attack. Her side heaved, her ribs showing the strain with each breath, suggesting something deeper than a simple external injury. The man's chest tightened as he realized that whatever had caused this pain was more than just physical. It was something far more complex, something life-threatening. The lioness's eyes flickered toward him, wide with distress. Her once vibrant amber gaze was clouded with exhaustion and pain, a silent plea for relief that could not be answered easily. Her body trembled under his soft touch, and he could feel the heat of her skin beneath his fingers. Her breathing was ragged now, and the heavy silence between them was broken only by the sound of her labored breaths. It was clear she wasn't just hurt, she was suffering, in a way that suggested an underlying condition that went beyond injury alone. The man gently placed his hand on her side, careful not to startle her, his touch steady and respectful. The lioness didn't flinch, but her breathing seemed to steady for a brief moment, as if she found some small comfort in his presence. The man's mind raced. He needed to do something, but he couldn't move too quickly. Time was slipping away, and he wasn't sure what to do next. Was it a wound, an infection, or something more? The blood staining her coat seemed fresh, dark against the warm gold of her fur, but it was impossible to know whether it was the result of an animal attack or some other cause. Her cubs were nowhere to be seen, and the man wondered if they had been left behind or if they had wandered off. There was no way to know, and the uncertainty gnawed at him. He had to act quickly, and yet there was so much he didn't understand about the situation. He stood up slowly, taking a few steps back to survey the scene. He was a stranger in the lioness's world, and he could feel the weight of her trust in that moment, fragile, unspoken. He scanned the horizon, looking for any signs of danger, for any other predators that might be lurking nearby. Nothing. The area was quiet, still. The savannah felt distant, as though holding its breath. There was no time to waste, and he knew that whatever intervention he could offer had to come now. Without knowing how much longer she could hold on, he moved quickly but carefully, aware of the enormity of the moment. As his fingers brushed her fur again, the lioness's body shuddered beneath his touch. The pain was clear, but it was also something more, something that needed immediate attention. Her struggle was not just for survival, but for something much deeper, something that could not be soothed by simple measures. The man knew the weight of his actions now. There was no second chance here. Every second counted. The silence that had settled around the fallen lioness was broken only by the soft, rhythmic padding of small feet against the earth. The man's eyes shifted towards the horizon, where two small figures appeared, stepping out from the thick grass with hesitant, unsteady movements. They were lion cubs, fragile, still learning to navigate the world, yet undeniably hers. Their tiny bodies swayed with each awkward step, their movements unsure but full of a quiet determination. The man's heart tightened as he realized the weight of the moment. These cubs had come for their mother. Their presence added a new complexity to the situation, a layer of emotion that he couldn't ignore. They were innocent, unaware of the full scope of what had happened, but their bond to her was undeniable. The cubs, wide-eyed and alert, moved closer, their small bodies trembling with the uncertainty of the unknown. As they neared the fallen lioness, they paused, sniffing the air with their tiny, twitching noses. Their hesitation was palpable, their bodies still as they sought out the scent of their mother. The cubs, young as they were, hadn't yet encountered a human up close, and it was clear from their wary gazes that they were unsure of the man's presence. They were not frightened, but they didn't trust him either, their curiosity battling with the instinctual caution they had inherited. The air grew heavy with tension, and the man knew that he needed to remain calm, that any misstep could send them fleeing or cause further distress. He stayed perfectly still, watching them as they moved closer, his own breath slow and steady. The lioness, though still struggling, turned her head slightly toward her cubs. Her large frame trembled as she attempted to lift her head, but the pain was too great, her strength drained. She could not rise to protect them, not in her weakened state. Her body shook with the effort, but it was clear that she could not shield them from the world. The cubs, despite their hesitation, inched closer to their mother. Their tiny paws shifted in the grass, their eyes never leaving her as they slowly closed the distance. The man, aware of the delicate balance unfolding, remained motionless. He had no intention of being seen as a threat to these young ones, but he also knew that his very presence added an unsettling element to their fragile world. A moment of stillness passed, and the cubs stopped a few feet away from the man, their wide eyes locked onto his face, unsure of what to make of him, but unwilling to move further. The tension in the air thickened, the quiet exchange between them stretching long, like an unspoken question that hung in the balance. The lioness, still laying on the ground, gave a low, soft growl, gentle yet firm, a mother's instinct to protect. It wasn't a sound of aggression, but a warning, a message to her cubs that the man was not to be trusted just yet. Despite her weakened state, her presence was powerful, her role as their protector still clear. The man lowered himself slightly, his body language respectful, his posture non-threatening. He knew that in this moment, calmness would speak louder than anything he could say. His voice, when it came, was a gentle murmur. "It's okay," he whispered, though he knew his words would likely not reach them. But perhaps, in the quiet of his tone, they would sense the calmness in his presence. He was not a threat. He would not force them to flee. Time seemed to slow, the world around him fading into the background as the cubs glanced at each other. There was a subtle exchange between them, a moment of silent communication as they considered the next step. After a few long moments, their decision seemed to come without words. They took another tentative step forward, inching closer to their mother, and then, as if in unison, they gently nudged her with their small bodies, their tiny faces brushing against the roughness of her fur. The moment was fragile, tender, as they offered what little comfort they could. They didn't fully understand the gravity of the situation, but in that quiet act, they were reaching out, trying to connect with her in the only way they knew how. The man watched, his heart heavy with the quiet beauty of the scene unfolding before him. The cubs, still small and innocent, stood near their mother, confused by her stillness, but instinctively nuzzling her, seeking the warmth of her presence. There was a tenderness in the air, an unspoken bond that was both fragile and profound. The man remained a quiet observer, fully aware that this was a moment that transcended understanding. The cubs, in their innocence, were witnessing the reality of life, of loss, of survival, and of love, without fully knowing it. But they would remember. And so, the man stood silently, witnessing this fragile connection, the heart of the wild unfolding quietly before him. The silence that enveloped the scene seemed to stretch into eternity, the air heavy with tension and the weight of uncertainty. The lioness lay on the ground, her body still and weak, but there was something in the atmosphere, a quiet shift that could not be ignored. Her cubs, small and fragile, remained close by, their tiny bodies nestled against her in an almost instinctual act of comfort. They nudged her gently with their soft heads, their movements tentative but filled with the kind of trust only a mother and her young could share. The lioness's body trembled less now, the violent shakes of earlier fading into a calmer rhythm. She did not rise, but there was a subtle change in the air, something that hinted at the possibility of life, a soft flicker of hope. The man, observing from a distance, held his breath. There was no grand, dramatic shift, no sudden transformation, just the quiet unfolding of something miraculous, something that words could not fully capture. The lioness's breathing, once shallow and ragged, began to deepen, her gasps less frequent but more steady. The rhythm of her breath became more deliberate, as though the presence of her cubs, the simple act of their closeness, was breathing life back into her. The pauses between her breaths lengthened, and with each steadying breath, the tension in the air seemed to ease just a little more. It was a small shift, almost imperceptible, but to the man it was unmistakable. The cubs, though small and still uncertain, seemed to sense the change as well. One of them pressed closer to the lioness, curling up beside her, its tiny body seeking comfort in the warmth of its mother. The other remained near, its wide eyes fixed on the scene, unsure of what was happening but drawn to the sense of peace that was slowly settling over them. Their innocent affection was not a cure, not in the way that medicine could heal wounds, but it was a healing force in its own right. The cubs, with their unwavering trust and instinctual need to be close, had brought something that neither the man nor the lioness had expected, an undeniable sense of calm. The lioness's head, which had been heavy on the ground, lifted slightly, just enough for her trunk to twitch in a small gesture of recognition. Her body, still weak, seemed to find a new sense of stability, the tremors lessening with every breath she took. It was not a complete recovery, but there was now something more, something deeper, a sense of peace that had begun to settle over her. Her cubs, sensing the change, grew more confident in their movements. The one curled against her side nestled even closer, its tiny body instinctively seeking the warmth and comfort of its mother. The other, still unsure but comforted by the presence of its sibling, stayed nearby, watching with wide eyes. The man remained still, his presence almost invisible in the vastness of the savannah. He understood now that this was not just about the lioness's physical wounds. It was about something more profound. It was the quiet, unspoken bond between mother and cub, the bond that even the harshest forces of nature could not easily break. The cubs, with their innocent affection and unwavering trust, had sparked something in the lioness. It was a slow, subtle shift, a quiet miracle unfolding before him, and he could only watch in awe as it continued. He realized that this moment, this fragile dance between life and death, was not one he could control. It was unfolding on its own terms, guided by forces far greater than anything he could offer. The lioness, surrounded by her cubs, was finding a way back from the brink of despair. The road ahead would still be long, but in this moment there was a sense of peace, a sense of quiet strength. It was not the end of the story, but a new beginning, one that would unfold slowly, steadily, like the quiet rise of dawn after a long, dark night. As the moments stretched on, the lioness's movements grew more deliberate, her body responding to the call of life with a quiet determination. Her once diminished form, now supported by the pulse of the wild around her, seemed to gather strength from the very earth beneath her. The cubs, sensing the shift in the air, instinctively moved away slightly, giving their mother space, allowing her the room she needed to rise. The tension that had gripped her body moments before began to loosen, and she took a slow, measured breath, her chest rising and falling with more purpose than before. Her massive body, still fragile from the ordeal, heaved against the earth, the muscles beneath her fur trembling with the effort. But she did not falter. There was a grace in her struggle, an unspoken understanding that each movement, no matter how small, was a victory. The man, still kneeling a distance away, observed with quiet awe as the lioness found her footing once more. Her head, which had once bowed in exhaustion, slowly lifted, her amber eyes now clearer, more focused. The intensity of her gaze was undiminished, a reminder that even in her vulnerability, she was a creature of immense power. Her breath, still heavy, was no longer marked by the agonizing struggle of earlier, but instead carried the rhythm of renewal. The lioness, though not fully recovered, stood once more on the savannah, a symbol of the wild's quiet strength. It wasn't just the cubs that seemed to give her strength. There was something in the air itself, a shift in the atmosphere, a silent presence that added to the power of this moment. The herd, though unseen, seemed to surround them, their collective energy weaving through the lioness's recovery. The man could feel it too, the subtle change in the environment, as if the very land had exhaled, offering its silent support. The tension of the moment began to ease, the harsh realities of the savannah softened by the invisible yet undeniable presence of the wild's natural support system. It was a reminder that life, in all its fragility and strength, was never truly alone. As the lioness stood, her cubs now flanking her, the sense of danger seemed to pass, if only for the moment. The cubs, though still small and uncertain, moved closer to their mother, their bodies finding strength in her presence. They stood tall beside her, their eyes wide with the innocence of youth, but also with a trust that was unspoken, forged in the bond of family. The lioness, now on her feet, gave a soft shake of her body, the movement gentle but purposeful. She was not fully recovered. Her muscles still trembled and her breath was labored, but the will to live had found its place again within her. The light in her eyes, once clouded with exhaustion, now carried the quiet fire of resilience. The cubs, sensing the shift in their mother's strength, nuzzled her gently, their small bodies seeking the warmth and comfort of her presence. They were not just her cubs. They were her strength, her reason to rise again. Together they formed a unit, small but powerful, bound by an unbreakable connection to one another and to the wild. The lioness, though weary, stood tall once more, a quiet testament to the endurance of life. The man, deeply moved by the sight, took a slow, steady breath. Rising from his place on the ground, he felt the weight of the moment shift. This was not the end. It was a continuation, an unfolding journey. The lioness's struggle was not over, but in that moment she had found her strength once again. With the help of her cubs and the silent watch of the herd, she would find her way forward. The savannah, which had once seemed so harsh, now felt softer, as if it too had exhaled in relief. The air seemed to lighten, filled with the renewed strength of life, a life that would continue as it always had, with quiet resilience and unspoken power. The lioness, now standing tall, her cubs by her side, began to move slowly forward. The savannah stretched wide before them, its vastness a reminder of the long road ahead. But for now, in this moment, the lioness and her cubs were not alone. The wild had answered their call, and together they would continue. The lioness, now fully able to stand, gathered herself with a slow, deliberate grace. Her breath came steady, no longer labored by the exhaustion that had once weighed her down. The cubs, their movements more assured than before, stayed close, their small bodies bouncing lightly with each step as they followed their mother's lead. The bond between them was unmistakable. Each of them, though still small and unsteady, had found strength in the other. The lioness, her body bearing the marks of the struggle, now carried the quiet resilience of survival in her movements. There was no tremble in her legs, no hesitation in her stride. She was a mother, leading her young forward into the world they belonged to. The man stepped back, his presence no longer necessary, his role now complete. There was nothing more he could do. He gave them space, allowing the lioness and her cubs to move freely, no longer burdened by human intervention. He watched as the lioness led her cubs away, their small forms moving in sync with hers, a testament to the strength of their bond. Each step they took was a small victory, a quiet reclaiming of their place in the vastness of the savannah. The open plains stretched out before them, endless and welcoming. The tall grasses swayed gently in the wind, and the lioness, strong and sure, guided her cubs into the wild. Her figure, once faint and fragile, gradually faded into the horizon, swallowed by the land she was born to roam. The man stood still, watching them leave. His heart was quiet, full of gratitude for the strength and endurance he had witnessed. He felt no sense of loss, only a profound peace, knowing that his presence had been a small part of something much greater. The lioness and her cubs were no longer in need of his help. They were free now, and the savannah had once again returned to its natural rhythm. The air around him felt lighter, the tension of the previous hours dissolving with each passing moment. He could still feel the weight of their survival, the deep understanding that life in the wild was not simply about enduring. It was about the quiet resilience to rise again, to reclaim one's place in the world. As the last of the lioness's form disappeared into the distance, the man turned away, the reality of the moment settling deeply within him. He had witnessed not just a rescue, but a reminder of nature's unyielding strength. The bond between mother and cub, fragile yet unbreakable, had been restored. The wild, in its own way, had healed itself. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying with it the distant calls of birds, the soft murmur of life continuing in its natural flow. The sky, once heavy with the weight of uncertainty, now felt open, stretching wide with the quiet promise of tomorrow. The man took a slow breath, the air now calm and cool, and he began to walk away. His steps were light, but they carried the weight of the savannah with him. The land had spoken to him in ways words could never fully capture. He had been a witness, a brief moment in the unfolding of a much larger story, and as he walked, the memory of the lioness and her cubs, of their strength, their quiet trust, stayed with him. The wild had its own rhythm, its own quiet healing. The man, knowing his place in it, walked on, carrying with him the unspoken truth of the savannah, that sometimes the greatest healing comes in silence, in the simple return to what is wild.